Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Thursday session here at Design Cuts. And I am joined by our good friend, Anna Aspnes. Welcome back, Anna.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Anna, what are we going to be learning today?
Today, I'm going to show you how to use some of the Anna Aspnes Designs product range to create a photo overlay. So I've got a couple of tricks up my sleeve using art play palettes and artsy transfers. Kind of a cool way to quickly and easily blend your photos before you even get started. And then using textures and other multimedia elements to build up the composition.
Amazing. Anna, without further ado, over to you. I can't wait to see this. I love overlays, so it should be a fun session.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So this is the layout we're going to recreate. I'm going to just do what I usually do or have started to do at the beginning of these sessions to just kind of show you how this builds up. So we start with a solid background, and then we add in one of these cool photo blends clipping masks to which we're going to clip our images. And then we're going to add in some transfers and overlays to start building up that overlay effect, and add in some Photoshop brushes to increase the visual interest. And then using the multimedia documents, we're going to add some more dimensional element overlays, and then finish it up by adding some textures and also a kind of a word art title, really just to kind of hide some areas of the photo that I don't want to have visible. So that's the layout. So I'm going to create this new document, and I like to work in inches because we do that in the United States. And I like to work at 12 by 12, and the paper designs that I create in these kits are actually designed at 12 by 12 because that happens to be the standard scrapbooking size. The important part of this is that you make sure that you have a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. This is going to ensure that you have great print quality when you actually decide to either print this as part of a photo book or you upload it for print as a 12 by 12 output that you're going to place into a page protector and place into an album so that these pages can be viewed and enjoyed. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And you can see that I have my rulers enabled, and you can do that by going to view and ensuring that you have this rulers option checked. And this is going to show you these rulers. I just find it quite helpful in terms of placement just to have that marker there. And then we're going to navigate to our archive bundle. Now, I have actually copied all of the previews out of these different products just to kind of show you what you get as part of this bundle. So this is the Art Play Palette preview. And within that, you have a number of artsy papers. There are 4 different artsy papers and 5 solid style papers. And then a number of transfers. These transfers are delivered in PNG single layer format. So we're going to be using both those and the Artsy Transfers archive. The difference between these artsy transfers and the transfers and overlays is that the artsy transfers are delivered in PSD format. So I'm going to show you the difference and the increased flexibility that you have with the Artsy Transfers archive. And I do get this question, and I noticed it in the chat box before we started the session. The difference between, are there any differences other than the PSD and PNG format? Typically, I try to create variation between the overlays and the artsy transfers, but sometimes there can be a little bit of overlap. So that should cover that question there. And then we have these element files. And again, these are delivered in both PSD and PNG format. So this allows you to manipulate the layers individually, or if you're not using Photoshop, then you can layer up those elements in the program of your choice. And then there is also a brush set that comes with the Art Play Palette collection, 4 different clipping mask styles, which I'm going to show you how to use, and then some spackle textured brushes, which are great for adding some textual design to your layouts.
Basically, a whole ton of stuff, Anna.
Yeah, a whole ton of stuff. I could have saved myself some time and just said you get a load of stuff. So I'm going to go and navigate into our first Art Play Palette file. These are the different papers that we have available. And in this case, I'm going to start off with one of these solid papers, and I'm literally going to just drag that from its location and drag it directly onto our new layout design, and it's going to place it. You can double click, or you can click on the check mark at the top of your screen if you're working in Photoshop. If you're working in Elements, then that's going to be located on the bounding box. And you can also import these files by going to File, Open, and then navigating to your supplies. So you've got two different ways of importing. And then from here, I'm going to set up the foundation for our photo. So to do this, we're going to navigate to those 12 by 12 page photo blends. And I'm going to bring in file number 3, which is this one here. And you can see that this is a PNG file. If I drag this in, now I'm going to just drag it into the background of my program, because I want to show you that this has various degrees of transparency. So the area that's really super black is very opaque. And then the areas where we can see the checkered background, those are most transparent. And so this is what's going to create the variation or the blending that occurs when we apply a photo to that file. So you can see that I just dragged that over using the Move tool from my Tools panel. You're going to click, hold down that left mouse button, drag, and then release that left mouse button to place it onto your layout foundation. And we're going to go ahead and close that because we no longer need it. And then I'm going to navigate to the photo that I want to use. So I picked up this one, not super exciting. This was taken in Edinburgh at New Year. So not the best place to be in terms of weather, because it's super dark at that time of year.
That looks about right from my memories.
And it's really cold. But I thought it would be a good way to show you how you can jazz up a fairly kind of mundane photo by using these techniques. So that was the purpose for picking this particular image. So I'm going to just drag it into the background in this case, because I don't want it to automatically resize to my canvas. And then I'm going to drag that using that same Move tool technique. And you want to make sure that the photo completely extends over the edges of your clipping mask. Now, I've been having some issues with my bounding box. For some reason, it's not showing. So I have to kind of play with it a little bit. So I'm just making sure that this kind of covers the entire area. We can always manipulate it when we have clipped the image to the mask. And then I'm going to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. You can also use the commands Alt, Control, or G. If you're on a Mac, that would be Option Command plus G. And you can see by just clipping that down, the photo conforms to the shape of the underlying mask. So now I'm going to just resize this and kind of bring it into position. So I kind of want this building here to be my focal point. And so I'm going to place that in the most opaque area of the clipping mask so that we can see that detail more clearly. You'll notice that the areas that are more transparent, that's where the image is less visible, sort of in the back of the cab here and up in the sky. So moving on from here, we're now going to, this is our layout foundation. We're now going to just improve the look of our photo. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. We can apply blending modes to the clipping mask layer. So we can do that by selecting that clipping mask layer, clicking on this normal, and it's going to activate a menu. And this has all kinds of different blending modes, which allow us to change the look of our photo. Now you can see that the lightened ones obviously lighten the image and they don't have too much effect, whereas the darkened ones actually offer some nice contrast. So I'm going to go with this linear burn option. The other option would also be to duplicate the photo layer and perhaps add different blending modes. So in this case, because we darkened our image by applying that blending mode to the clipping mask layer, then I'm going to apply a screen blending mode, which lightens it slightly just to kind of counteract that and increase the contrast. Also, in addition to that, you can also use the adjustment tools. So you go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. If you're working in Elements, that's Enhance, Adjust Lighting Levels. And this allows you to manually increase the highlights. You can increase the shadows. You can change with the mid-tones. And you can see how you're able to just get a more contrast in that image. So that's our layout foundation. So we've created the foundation, we've edited our image. Now it's time to bring in our design elements. So I'm going to first of all start with the transfers and overlays. All right, so I'm going to head back into my ArtPlay palette. You'll notice there's two different folders. Typically, the transfers and overlays are homed in the second folder under transfers and overlays. And you can see that we have a bunch of different files. Now, unfortunately, I'm working in Windows 10, and it does this really nice thing where you get to see this black background sometimes. So I apologize for that. And you can see that it doesn't really matter what I do. Sometimes it kind of comes up like that. But if I click on these files, you should be able to see them in their raw format. So these are the PNG overlay and transfer files. So you can see this is kind of what they look like. And then if I drag one of these into my workspace, and in this case, I'm just going to drag them directly onto my canvas. But you can see that they just go on top of our design. And so you can just move them around as you prefer. If I bring this into the background here, I'm going to just actually, we'll do it with the second one. So the second transfer here, if I drag this into the background, you'll see that transparency by the checkered board. And you can also see in the layers panel that we have just one layer, which shows that it is a single layer format. So I can kind of bring this in and just literally it's dragging and dropping these element designs onto your canvas. And there we go, this is the bounding box. And so you can resize these, you can rotate them, you can also apply those blending modes. So I'm just going to place that like that. Now I'll go ahead and I'll bring in the artsy transfer so you can see the difference. Go ahead and access that. And so this is the artsy transfer. And in this case, they're the same file. And you can see that it's the same image, but look at all the different layers here. So that means that now if I turn this layer off and I bring this layer back on, I'm going to select all of those layers in my layers panel by holding down that shift button on my keyboard, selecting the first layer and the last layer, and then with the move tool, drag that over. Then the neat part about these different layers is that you can now go in and I can manipulate them by turning off some of these layers. I can manipulate them by rotating them. I can resize them individually from one another. I can also go and I can recolor some of these layers. If I wanted it to have more of a yellow, I could go ahead and do that. I can apply blending modes to just part of that layer. So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate these to make them work for your layout design. So I'm already
Anna, I always love how you include the layered versions of these. I don't really know anyone else that does. Most people just provide the flattened version, but the level of control that it gives you to go and tweak and customize every little piece of it, as well as, to be honest, see how it was constructed in the first place, is really interesting. I'm a geek. When I open your packs, I unpick the layers and I'm like, oh, that's how she made that really cool looking transfer. I can get an understanding for it.
So it's cool because you can literally go in and you can modify any of the pieces. And I'm deviating from my original design here, but that's totally fine because it just means I get to show you, how versatile, but I could make this more saturated if I wanted to. I can increase the saturation. I can change the color of it to have more of the yellow tones coming through. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And like I said, there is some overlap between the transfers and overlays and the artsy transfers. But of course, with the artsy transfers, you do get this ability to be able to use the layers separately. And then, of course, you don't have to use these elements sort of completely as they are. You could maybe just choose to select a layer. I'm going to use this auto select option and just grab this paint layer, and I can just use one layer if I wanted to, and just bring that onto my design and completely ignore the rest of these layers. So that's the other way that you can use those. And then I've got a couple of other transfers I was going to add into the mix here. So I'm just going to check. So we go back to our art play palette. And I believe we had the art strokes. And I think I had this artsy transfer number 4. So notice now I'm actually selecting multiple transfers. I'm holding down my control or my command key. And this allows me to be selective about which of the layers I want to bring into my design. So I've selected these 3. Because these are just PNG format, then I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of add these directly into my canvas. Now, I was very careless about the placement of my cursor in my design. So I want to just drag these up to the top of my layers panel. And then that artsy transfer that we just added, I'm going to go ahead and select all of those layers by holding down that shift button. And I'm going to go to layer, group layers. And this just helps to keep my layers panel nice and organized. And it helps me to be able to see what I'm doing as well. And then I'm going to basically just move these pieces around and place them as preferred. So we have this one. Maybe drag this one up. You might want to change the order size of them. So we have that like that. And again, you can kind of resize these if you want to. Rotate them. And then we have this art stroke here. So again, I can kind of place that there. And again, I can rotate it, but I quite like how that kind of adds a little bit of motion and adds in some curvature to the angular nature of the architecture. So notice now how I'm placing these elements to really draw the eye to the focal point and sort of mask out some of these other areas.
And a quick question.
Yeah.
Let me check who asked this. Johan asks, the main focal point building is crooked. Does that bother you, or is it intentional?
I was just thinking that actually, and I was going to go back. You can see that I actually straightened it up on this design. If I wanted to straighten it up, though, it would be super easy. I just select my photo layers and I go to my bounding box and I just kind of straighten it up.
To be honest, the crooked thing was kind of working because, you know, some of the other lines around it are also crooked and you have these conflicting angles, but it worked in quite a nice abstract way.
Yeah, well, you know, when I actually first did this composition, I was like, man, it's crooked. I don't like that. And then when I actually straightened the building up, I didn't like it as much. So it's kind of finding a happy medium. But I think you're right. Because of all the other different angles, I don't think it makes too much of a difference. So, you know, I'm going to go back with the crooked on this one.
Perfect.
I guess it's not going to let me do it. But yeah, so yeah, it doesn't bother me in answer to your question. I definitely take the creative license approach. You know, one of the fun things about this artistry is that none of it has to be real. You know, so you can kind of impart your own creative license and what pleases you into whatever design that you're creating.
Amazing.
Okay, so now I'm going to work on the brushwork, and for this we're going to use the brushes that come with the Art Play palette. So if I go in and I show you those, these are delivered in PNG format, so the same format as the transfers and overlays, but they're black and white. And then they also come with these 2 ABR files. There's a large one and a regular size one. The difference between the two is that the large have brushes greater than 2,500 pixels. In previous versions of Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, the maximum pixel size for brushes was 2,500 pixels. In versions of Photoshop Elements 15 and above, and of course the new Creative Cloud, we now have the option to use brushes up to 5,000 pixels. So in cases where brushes are larger than 2,500, then I provide options for both types of programs. So it doesn't matter what version of the software that you're using. In order to load these brushes, the easiest way is to grab that ABR file, drag it into your Photoshop workspace, and then drag it into the brushes panel here. And you can see that that brush set has now been deposited into our brushes panel. If you can't see a brushes panel, go up to Window and ensure that option is checked. If I uncheck that, you can see it disappears. if I recheck it, it comes back into view. And from here, you have the option to increase the size of your brushes. I like to have my settings set at brush tip. So this allows me to actually view the thumbnail or the image format of the brush. If I go ahead and change it to brush stroke, for example, then it's going to, or brush name, it's going to change the different way that I can view my brushes. So this is kind of my preference here, and I can increase it as large as I like so that I can view the actual brushes. Now, when you're using brushes, you want to make sure that you are always stamping on a new layer. This allows you to have more flexibility with your brushes. If you go ahead and you stamp multiple brushes on the same layer, and then you decide you want to remove one of those, then it becomes kind of a bit of a sticky mess because they're all on top of one another. So I always recommend that you use a separate layer for each brush stroke. You control the color by clicking on the foreground color in the tools panel. This is going to activate your color picker. And then from here, you can manually use this sort of spectrum here to pick the color that you want, and then go and click into this area to get the different shades and hues of that color. You can also sample colors from your layout design, which is my preferred way to do this. So if I go ahead and click that, you can see it's going to sample that color. And go ahead and click OK. And then with the paintbrush tool selected, I'm now going to go down to the brushes panel, and I'm going to select a brush. And so I'm going to go with this one first. The number under here corresponds to its pixel size, just in case you're curious. And then it's a matter of just sort of clicking that brush onto our layout design. And then you can also go ahead and you can apply a different blending mode if you want to. I tend to gravitate a lot towards color burn or to linear burn, sometimes overlay. In this case, I'm going to go with color burn. And then you can select a different brush here like this one. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer by clicking on the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel in Photoshop, or at the top of the layers panel in Elements. And you can click that on like that. And again, change the blending mode. And then I think I had one more brush I was going to add, which is this 12. So this one here, and this one I added up at the top here. So ensure I have that new layer selected. Sometimes I like to actually just stamp the brush in the center of my canvas. When you stamp it towards the edge, then you can lose a part of the brush, so that if you wanted to reposition or move it around, then you would end up with part of that brush cut off. So sometimes it's beneficial to just stamp that into the center of your design, apply the blending mode, and then go and move it around your canvas to sort of find the best fit. So in this case, I wanted to align this texture like this. And I'm just going to use this eraser tool with a brush. And I just make a soft round brush and just go in and just remove that line there that was kind of going across. So you can see we're building this up. If I want to adjust the opacity and make that less prominent, I can do that as well. And then, so that's the brushwork. So that just adds another level of visual interest into the mix. I'm just going to drag this one down. There we go. I'll bring this one just a bit further down. Okay, so the next part is to work with our multimedia files. So we're going to add in some more dimensional elements to this. I like to use dimensional elements not only because my background is memory keeping and scrapbooking, but I also really love the texture and the dimension that it adds to a design. So to do this, we're going to navigate to our multimedia documents. And so these are delivered in 2 different folders. And then I try to deliver each folder or each file in a separate folder. So you'll find the PSD file, and then sometimes you'll find a kind of a file where the PNG file is just in one single layer. The only time I don't do this is if there are photoglows involved, because that involves changing the blending mode. And of course, if you change the blending mode of a single layer, then it's going to affect all layers. So this may or may not be present in some of the multimedia files that I offer, but I usually, especially in the most recent ones, include all of the layers separately, so that if you're working in a different program from Photoshop or Elements, then you can layer up these element designs in your version of whatever program that you're using. So I'm going to drag this into the background, and it's really important that you do actually drag this into the background. If I drag it directly onto my canvas, you can see what happens is that all of those layers that I promised you have all been condensed into single layer format. So it's really important that you take this PSD file and you drag it into the background, and then you get access to all of these different layers here. And then I like to use these individually. So I'm going to just select this paper layer here in the background. This is the one that I want to add. And I'm going to drag this into my design. And it looks like I've picked up a different one to the one I had intended to use. But it's okay. We're going with it. So I'm going to drag this in.
We're freestyling. It's all good.
We're totally freestyling. So anyway, I mean, I just love that it adds just a little bit of dimension. And then go back to my file. And then this time I'm going to drag in. If you have your auto select option checked with the move tool selected, then you can actually click and access these layers individually, and it will automatically select that corresponding layer in the layers panel. So this allows me then to kind of build up my own design. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this. I have to figure out what's going on with my bounding box. For some reason, it doesn't want to show all the time. So I'm aligning that stitching with the edge of the paper here, and then maybe we'll bring in this element. So notice how the shadow layer is separate from the element layer, and this is really great because it allows me then to change the opacity of that layer, so I can make it darker or lighter. I can also use the warp tool if I wanted to adjust how that shadow sort of comes out from behind the element. So if I want it to have a much greater impression in terms of its dimensional component. And then I can also go and I can change the color of that if I wanted to. So if I wanted it to have more of a kind of a brown, I can go ahead and do that. If I wanted it to have a blue, I could go and I could select a dark blue and I could make that blue. So kind of a lot of flexibility there. I'm going to go ahead and bring this into our design, and then maybe add in this element here, this fastener. So I'm selecting both the shadow and the fastener layer so that we can have this like this. And then I'm just going to rotate that. I can even resize it if I wanted to, if I don't want it to be quite so large, and build up that area there.
I love this element that you're working on right now. And it's reminding me of, we have some gigantic packs in our marketplace where it's like hundreds of vintage objects that you can create scenes out of.
Yeah.
This is essentially what you're working with here. It's just that you've kind of put them into a nice composition and packaged them up together. But when you start separating and extracting them, there's a lot of individual elements here that you could really separate and use for all kinds of projects.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, just in this particular file alone, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 different elements just in this alone.
Crazy.
You times that by 4 and you think of how many elements you get just in one pack, then it's a lot.
I think it's great. And obviously they've been chosen to go together because they work really well together and complement one another, but they're really strong individually, I have to say.
Yeah, you can definitely go ahead and kind of build your own compositions using it. So that's kind of one little element that I wanted to add into the mix. Notice how it sort of mirrors this area on this side. And so we've got this symmetry that's happening, which again supports our focal point in the center. And now I'm going to go and navigate to our third file. This is the one I wanted to bring in. I think this was the one that I actually ended up using the first time around. This paper edge. This was the one I think I used, but we're just going with the flow. And in here, I just want to use the clock hand and the I guess it's chicken wire, the fencing with the urban threads and the rivets. So I'm going to go ahead using that control or command key. I'm going to select these elements, and as it turns out, they all happen to be in succession to one another. So with those selected and the auto select option turned off, I'm going to drag these into our design, and I'm just going to place this down here and just keep this as is. And then this hand element, I had it over here in my previous one, but I seem to have lost how that was going to work. I think because I have this is the only problem with actually doing this, is it's really hard to recreate the same thing twice. I think it's because I have this. Let's go ahead and add this to the top. There we go. So I kind of wanted it to be more of a circle. So all I did there was I just brought this transfer to the top of some of these other transfers above this artsy transfer, so that I was able to see this circle. And this circle here sort of gives the impression of a clock hand. Usually on these sorts of buildings, there's a clock. I don't see one in this case, but there's all sorts of other circles. You can see the circles of the wheels of the cab. We've got the circle here. And so just all these circles create this repetition that leads the eye through the design. So this is what I'm doing. And I'm also, these circles also stand in opposition to the linear nature of the architecture as well. So that creates tension. It creates an unexpected kind of jarring of the eye. And that's what helps to create visual interest. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. So that's using the multimedia elements. And then finally, I completed this just by adding some textual components. So with the my cursor, or the selection of the last layer in the layers panel, I'm going to create that new layer, select the paintbrush tool from the tools panel, and then I actually don't have the spackle textures loaded. So I'm going to go and select those from our archive bundle. So this is the last product in the mix. So again, these files are all delivered in PNG format. And the reason I include the PNG format is if you're not working in a program that supports ABR files, and also too, if you're working in a much earlier version of Photoshop, you can then use these files to recreate a brush set. So if the brush set doesn't work in your version of Photoshop, or if for some reason you accidentally save over it, as I have done, then you can go and you can use these files to redefine new brushes. So you can use these by dragging the PNG file into your design and just placing these over your image like that. And then you can go and recolor them if you wanted to. So if I go to Edit Fill, ensure that Preserve Transparency box is checked, because if you don't check it and you decide to use, let's go with just a kind of a brown color, it's just going to flood the layer with color. So if I go and I fill that and I ensure that Preserve Transparency box is checked, then it's just going to change the color of that image. And then you can apply a different blending mode. So
that's quite a game changer, actually, that Preserve Transparency. That saved a lot of headaches when I discovered that.
Yeah. So you can go ahead and you can add a different blending mode, and then you can go back. And then this time, instead of dragging in the PNG file, I am going to select that brush file, drag it directly into the panel. So now you can see these brushes have been loaded. And then now I can select the paintbrush tool from the tools panel. And now I can stamp these brushes. Remember, on a new layer, please. And then just kind of wherever you randomly want to place them. So in this case, I'll add a layer, a linear burn. And then maybe we'll do one more up at the top here. And add this one up here like this. And now this little line here is bothering me a little bit. You can add a layer mask and use brushes to non-destructively remove this line. I'm a scrapbooker. I'm not working for clients. Nobody's going to come and ask me to change this. And if it ends up in disaster, I'm just going to use the undo button. So I'm just going to use the eraser tool on the edge here. And for some reason, it's not working. Why is it not working? Oh, because it's the brush. So I want to just remove this layer. If I can find out which one. Can anyone else see this line, or am I just making it up at this point?
No, I think I can.
Yeah, it's not letting me find it. It could actually be part of the design, but what I'm really trying to do is get rid of this brush layer. I think it's actually part of the. No, it's not. Okay, now I'm really. So this is the way you do it. You have to go
I've
by
done it so many times.
process of elimination. And I still can't find it. You know what? I think it's the transfer. There it is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to select that transfer layer, and then I'm going to use that eraser tool just to kind of remove the edge. And then finally, I added in a title. Now, I know most photo artists really aren't big into titles. The reason I wanted to add a title in this case is because I wanted to hide this traffic light here. Now, as it turns out, the way this has kind of come to fruition, because of just different placement of all the elements and that sort of thing, we're not seeing this as much. But you can see in this case how when I added the title, I was able to kind of cover up the cones, and they put up these weird things in Edinburgh during New Year's Eve, these sort of gates. I guess it's to kind of crowd control, I'm not sure. But anyway, I wanted to cover that up. And so I used this title work here. In this case, the way I've placed the elements, we're not really seeing too much of that. So maybe if I move this across a little bit, then you can kind of see how that would look. So you have the choice of moving the design, of course. But if I wanted to have it like this, then I would go ahead and select the type tool from the tools panel. And then in this case, I used a font called Charisma Alt. And I added the word Edinburgh. Is that right? My husband's American, and he says it wrong all the time. He calls it
Edinburgh.
Yeah, Edinburgh. And I'm like, there's no bro in Edinburgh. So he drives me crazy with it. So, but the thing is
for like a frat house.
Yeah, but the thing is now I've forgotten how to spell it because he's poisoned my mind against how to say it. So anyway, I'm going to place this sort of B over the top here, and I can reposition this so that it kind of sits on the top here. But notice how that kind of just adds a sort of a nice distraction and blocks out some of that sort of mess in the background. And then I also added a outer glow to that title. So to do that, I went to layer style outer glow, and that adds this cool kind of glow behind it and just sorts of makes it shine. And if you don't want it as white as that, you can use this color box and maybe just pick up some of this yellow just to soften it and click OK. And so that sort of completed my composition. And you could play around with the placement of it so that maybe have some of the transfers overlapping. This is where the artsy transfer too would come in, is if you wanted to potentially move some of these elements and sort of bring them over, maybe drag them above on top and change the blending mode and sort of have it sort of partially hidden. So again, lots of different ways that you can sort of start moving these elements around to create that really cool overlay effect. And that's all I've got for you, Tom.
Beautiful. Let's give it up for Anna, because what a great session once again. And I feel like a broken record. I say this every single time, but you truly are a master of composition because you always combine such a huge number of elements, but somehow draw the eye beautifully, create a really balanced composition, and just an incredible final piece of artwork. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. They try and pull in multiple elements and end up with a bit of a mess. But I know you've talked before in live sessions about some of your techniques compositionally to find that balance, but it's a skill. It really is. So bravo and incredible session, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that the design. So I've been doing this for 19 years. And so this comes innately to me, the design component. But I realized very quickly when I started teaching about 10 years ago that it doesn't to other people. So I had to kind of go back and figure out why I place things, where I do in terms of design principles. And so now I've kind of pulled all those design principles that support my techniques. And so now I teach those alongside the use of my products, because I think it's really important with a concept of it. It's all very well asking you to drag and drop things, but you have to know where to place those things. And so I definitely put a great emphasis on the teaching of design principles alongside the product usage, because I think it's such a huge part of it that doesn't necessarily come naturally to a lot of people.
Well, Anna, thank you again. Incredible, incredible session. I love this composition. Where is the best place to find you online for
You
any of
can
the design cutters that don't know where you
where
are
I
on the web
am.
yet?
Yeah.
Yeah,
AnnaAspnesDesigns.com. You can kind of find me there. I have a free class of getting started. And if you haven't already got it, there's a huge big bundle of digital art supplies you can have for free over there. Lots of resources on using my supplies. I also have a bunch of tutorials over on the YouTube channel. And I recently started doing live sessions on Twitch. So that's been kind of fun.
I love that.
So,
Yeah, I've heard really good things as well. A few people today in the comments raving about your Twitch sessions.
yeah, they're really fun, actually. I really enjoy them. So that's something that's going to stick around for a while, I think.
Anna, thank you again. Great fun. And we look forward to welcoming you back soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great summer.
Yeah, you too. I'm going to go look at air conditioners and see if I can find one in the UK.
If you can afford one in the UK, that's going to be the
oh yeah, they'll hike it up, I'm sure. Anna, take care.
Yes,
bye,
you
everyone.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye.